In a dark world filled with deceit, one united voice is crying out. Revealing the truth of God's Word. It's time to expose the hidden truth. And unravel the lies. While we're living beyond Satan's little season.
Welcome to Living Beyond Satan's Little Season show. We're your hosts,
Sister Crystal,
Brother Phil. The topic today, the Gog Magog War. What is its purpose? Now, this will be an interesting one because I've heard people say, I'm not understanding the Bible too well, because, God takes the devil, Satan, throws them into the abyss for 1,000 years just to release him for this final battle of the Gog Magog War. And people are going, why would he do that? Why is it? And then after he loses the Gog Magog War, he then ultimately gets thrown into the lake of fire after that. But people ask, well, what's the purpose of this Gog Magog War? Then there must be some reason why Satan was going on one last mission. God had one last mission to have Satan do. And what I'm going to explain today is the Bible actually gives a number of descriptions of this Gog Magog War in our Bibles. It's not only found just in the book of Revelation chapter 20, which most people are familiar with. It's also found in Ezekiel chapter 39 and Zechariah 14 and Isaiah 66. And we're going to go over all those today and explain the purpose behind the Gog Magog War. What people don't understand, and this is what I'm learning myself, that God's plan and purpose for mankind is quite a bit different than we're taught in churches today. That his plan is his divine plan, is the redemption of all mankind, but it's going to take more than just this lifetime to do it. He's got a multi-phase plan in play, and the Bible actually reveals a little bit of this plan. And I'm going to show you the little bit of the plan because the Bible tells us these things. But what people are stuck with is this heaven-hell paradigm. And so you're not going to see God's multifaceted plan if you just think everyone that's good is going to go to heaven, everyone's bad is going to go to hell and burn for all eternity, and then that's the end of everything. Because if that's what you think is God's ultimate plan is, you've got another thing coming because he's got a bigger plan in play for humanity and for all of us. And we just have to read our Bibles, and he kind of tells us a little bit about this plan. He doesn't give us everything because obviously we're on a need-to-know basis, and we don't need to know the whole plan because he reveals it to us. He's going to reveal it to the satanic forces too because they read their Bibles as well. But we do get some clues in our Bibles. And now we're going to start with Revelation chapter 20 that discuss this Gog Magog War. And then we'll go to Ezekiel 39, which is the two chapters. Ezekiel 38 and 39 describes this Gog Magog War. And he gives really the reasons behind and the purpose behind the war.
Right.
In Ezekiel. And then he backs it up in Zechariah and in Isaiah. Yeah. So we pretty much know for a fact the purpose behind this war.
Well, God loves redundancy.
And he's given us a number of places that we can look up this war and see what's kind of going on. And that's why I'm excited. Okay, let's go ahead and start with Revelation 20, verse 7 through 10. This describes what happened with Satan getting released from the abyss and going out and deceiving all the nations. And the purpose behind the little season, Satan's little season, is to deceive the nations, specifically to go to war against the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And it explains that in Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. Go ahead and read that one.
And when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be loosed out of his prison And he will go out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth. Quarters of the earth? Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle. The number of them is as the sand of the sea. And they went up over the breadth of the earth, and circled around the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet were. And he will be tormented day and night forever and ever.
Okay, so in other words, the purpose behind Satan getting released is on purpose to deceive the nations. Okay, he's on a mission to deceive the nations, and this is what he's going to do here. Now, of course, it's prophesy of what he's going to do here. This is, of course, we know from our perspective a past event here. But to attack the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Now, I believe the beloved city, Jerusalem, over on New Earth. Now, I had some shows I discussed the difference. And there are two Jerusalems on New Earth. There's New Jerusalem,
right,
which is only the saints can enter into that city. Only the redeemed of the Lord can go in and out of the city of New Jerusalem. No one unclean can get into that city. It's like a members only club.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be a member to go in and out of that city. But there's another city on New Earth called just Jerusalem. And that's in the territory of Judah. And that's built and described actually in Ezekiel, the building of that city. And if you want to read a little bit of that at the very beginning of Ezekiel chapter 40, describes the construction of Jerusalem. When we know New Jerusalem, which came down out of heaven, wasn't constructed. It was constructed in heaven.
Right.
But the Jerusalem, the beloved city here, it was constructed here on New Earth. And this is the one that they're going up against. As it says, the sand of the seashore, they're going up against this. So we're going to learn the purpose behind why Satan is deceiving the nations and why the reason for his release and his last mission trip he's going on. He's on a mission from the Lord to deceive the nations for a purpose. And now we're going to read in Ezekiel 39, and Ezekiel 38 gives some descriptions of this war. And this is already a past event from our perspective, but it explains what happened in that war and how it all transpired and how, fire and brimstone came down from heaven and destroyed that army. That's in chapter 38. Now the 39 describes why the war took place. And we're going to start with verse 21 there. And God actually tells us a little information here on his purpose behind the war. Now, first thing you have to understand is that the reason for these covenants that God made with Israel, okay, on New Earth, it's really all about Israel getting reunited together and the saints of God, those who are the believers in Jesus Christ, we get grafted into Israel. Okay, we're not replacing Israel. We're joining Israel. That's what we're doing here, okay? So it's not replacement theology. We're not saying, no, Israel's out, the church is in. We're saying the church becomes the true Israel, and we join Israel. And so this is what's going on. When all Israel got their resurrection on New Earth, okay, they had their territories over there on New Earth. This is not happening on our earth. This is happening over there. And Ezekiel 39 describes this war, but later on, in the next 8 or 9 chapters, it describes a lot of what's going on over on New Earth, including the land that they got. Israel got, land inheritances again and all this other stuff. It describes all the prophecy of all that stuff. But that's all going on over on New Earth. What happened is God's covenant was really with Israel. Well, everybody got a resurrection to New Earth, including the wicked. Now, if you understand that part, now you're understanding why. What's God going to do with the Gentile nations who got their resurrection as well? Well, this is the next phase of God's plan, and the purpose behind the Gog Magog war was to introduce the Gentile nations, those who didn't know anything about the Lord, and they got their resurrection, to what God expects, and why God is really the Lord, and he is our creator God. God has a multi-phase plan for all this. Before, he didn't reveal himself in the Old Testament. Now, in the New Testament, he's kind of revealed himself, but then you still have all these people in the Old Testament that didn't know. They lived and died they didn't know the Lord. So now God's basically using this Gog Magog war to introduce the Gentile nations to his holiness and his goodness and his love and all this other stuff. Essentially, a conversion process to bring the Gentile nations to get to know the Lord. That is the purpose behind the Gog Magog war. And we're going to read about that in Ezekiel 39, verse 21 and following. Go ahead and read that one.
And I will put my glory among you, and all the nations shall see my judgment, which I did, and my hand which I brought upon them.
Okay, so here he's talking about his judgment, which was the Gog Magog war. Fire rained down from heaven, destroyed those armies. God is showing the Gentile nations now who he is in his glory by wiping them out and saying, no, this is not what's going to happen here. And he's showing his power and his glory and introducing himself to this Gentile nation, showing how powerful he is and all that. He already gave him a judgment. And that is, because previous to that, there was already a judgment day. But now there's another judgment that's happening here that we see that God's doing with these Gentile nations that didn't know the Lord, don't understand his ways. And now God is essentially going to introduce his ways via this battle, this Gog Magog war battle and destruction. And this is how he's doing it. Keep going.
And the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from this day and beyond. And all the nations shall know that the house of Israel, on account of their sin, was captured because they annulled the covenant against me, and I turned my face from them and delivered them into the hands of their enemies, and they all fell by the sword.
Okay, so he's kind of going back and explaining that, previous to that, Israel wasn't really faithful to the Lord. If you read that in the Old Testament, that, they tried to follow the Lord to some extent, but they were, kind of a lot of them were lukewarm. They really weren't on fire for God. They were just going through the motions. And as a result, God just said he turned them over to these Gentile nations as a judgment against them because they weren't 100% following the Lord. They were kind of, doing a little bit of the Lord's ways, but they were doing a little bit of all the idolatry going on. And this is God's way of showing these Gentile nations. The reason why I did that to Israel back then is because they weren't following me. Now, the Gog Magog war, let's fast forward to that time. The reason why you guys lost this war and why it was devastating to you guys is because they're now following me now and you guys aren't. So you see, the war, the script is kind of flipped now. And now they're having to face, why are we losing this war? Why, we had so many more, we outnumbered them 100-1. We should have won this thing. What happened? Well, this is what happened. God was showing them that numbers don't really matter.
Right.
It matters is having a heart that follows him. So he's introducing them now to his power and his glory by the loss of this war. And this is kind of what you see happening here.
Because of their uncleanliness and because of their violations of the law, I did it to them, and I turned my face from them. On account of this, thus says the Lord, now I will return the captivity in Jacob, and I will show mercy on the house of Israel, and I will be jealous on account of my holy name. And they shall take their own dishonor and the iniquity which they transgressed in their settling upon their land in peace, and there will not be one frightening.
Okay, so he's saying now that they're following me now, they got a resurrection. They're following me now. They learned my ways, because that's the next step on the resurrection of the dead, which happened, I believe, in 70 AD, when Israel and Judah became one nation again on New Earth, not here. It happened on New Earth. That's when they started following the Lord at that point. But God was really only interested in bringing them together and having them become a cohesive, unified force of righteousness throughout the new earth. That's what really their purpose was. Their purpose was to follow God's righteousness throughout all the new earth. And they were giving land inheritances over there, according to, we get this from later on in Ezekiel 47 and 48, we read about their land inheritances they got. They became a cohesive people following the Lord all the days of their life. And now, 1,000 years later, after they've been at it for 1,000 years, okay, you got to remember, all these things, take time. So 1,000 years later, they've been following the Lord for 1,000 years. Christ and the saints have been ruling for 1,000 years.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, they decide to turn on God's people, which is Israel at the time. But the problem is like before, they always lost the war because they weren't following the Lord. But this time, the script has flipped. They're following the Lord now, so the Lord's going to protect them and then introduce the Gentile nations to his glory, and so he wants to reach out to them now. See, this is kind of what you're reading here. And so, but they're thinking, we in the past, every time we've gone up against them, we've won, because they weren't faithful to the Lord. Now that they are faithful to the Lord is going to fight for them.
Right. Which
has he done in the past, but now they're 100% faithful to the Lord, and so they're going to do the right thing. Okay, let's go and continue on. And this is how God is going to start converting over the Gentile nations. Go ahead.
In my returning them from out of the nations, and my gathering them from out of the places of the nations, and I shall be sanctified among them before the nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God, in my appearing to them among the nations, in gathering them upon their land.
Okay, so we know when that happened. If you read a few previous chapters, there was a resurrection event, and they were placed on the land of Israel on New Earth. And that is where they were regathered. The gathering of all Israel was at the resurrection. See, people don't understand that. They think, there's supposed to be a regathering of Israel somewhere on earth. Hasn't happened yet. No, that was part of the resurrection event. It's very clear if you read Ezekiel chapter 38. It explains that very carefully. 37:38 explains all that. We have to understand that that gathering, Israel, Judah combined, a cohesive force now. Now they're following the Lord because they recognize, God resurrected us. We've got to follow the Lord now. And that's what they're doing now. And so this is what you see happening. But now they're very cohesive. They're doing the right thing, and they have been for the last 1,000 years. With who's running the unified Judah and Israel? Who's the king running them? Who is
David.
David. King David is resurrected and is basically now running Israel as a unified force, and has been for over 1,000 years.
Right.
Okay. But now you have Satan coming up and now attacking them. But they thought, in the past, every time we've beat Israel, they've been easy pickings because they weren't following the Lord during this time. So they had no protection from God. This is why if you want protection from the Lord, you've got to 100% be following the Lord. You can't be doing it halfway.
Right.
You can't be no lukewarm believer and God's going to be you having the Lord's protection. It ain't going to work that way.
Right.
Okay, so go and continue on. And of course, he talks about the nations here. Nations means Gentiles. Every time they use the word nations, that's the same word as Gentiles. And so he says here, I will be sanctified among and before the nations, before the Gentiles. He wants that to show his sanctification, his glory among the nations, the Gentiles, the people that aren't Israel and Judah, all those people. Okay, go ahead and continue on.
And I shall not abandon them any more, not one there. And I shall not turn my face any longer from them, because I poured out my rage upon the house of Israel, says the Lord, the Lord.
So, in other words, God's not going to abandon them anymore. He wasn't going to abandon, because why? Because they were following him with all their heart now.
Right.
They were doing the right thing. They were being obedient, and this is what God wanted all along, but they never did it. Now, under the covenant over on New Earth, with David running everything, and their territory is massive over there.
Right.
That they're now following the Lord. They're following his ways and his will, and this is what they're doing. And that's why God's not going to turn their back on them anymore. And so now the Gentiles are learning, well, the only way to have that kind of protection is to follow the Lord. Because I'm sure, and I can't know this for a fact, but maybe these Gentile nations over on New Earth were fighting amongst each other. And they decided to turn on Israel. But I don't know exactly how that all worked. But we don't know exactly what's going on over there. But that's a possibility. But now they're going to learn there's no use for any of that. Right. Okay, now we're going to go to Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 describes what's happening during the millennial reign of Christ, and also what's going on over on New Earth, and even describes the Gog Magog war there, and fire raining down from heaven and destroying those armies, and what happens after that. I know that this may shock you when I say that the Gog Magog war is described there in Zechariah 14, but yes, I believe it is. So let's go ahead and read from verse 12 and following. Go ahead and read that one.
And this will be the downfall in which the Lord shall smite all the peoples, as many as march against Jerusalem. Okay,
I believe this march against Jerusalem is the Gog Magog war surrounding the beloved city. This is, I believe, what as a description of what they're talking about here. Okay, the people surrounding them, just like they did. Okay, now we're going to read on, and we're going to see this describes the Gog Magog war perfectly here. Go ahead and continue on.
Their flesh shall melt away while standing upon their feet, and their eyes shall flow from out of their openings, and their tongue shall melt away in their mouth. Okay, and that happened because fire and brimstone came down from heaven and destroyed those armies. Right. And they're basically describing in kind of a gruesome way what happened to the armies that went up to fight Jerusalem at the Gog Magog war event. See, you can see that maybe fire and brimstone would cause, all that gore and destruction to happen to them, right? Right. Okay, let's go and continue on here. And there will be in that day a great astonishment from the Lord upon them, and they shall take hold each the hand of his neighbor, and shall closely join his hand to the hand of his neighbor. Okay, so in other words, there's a fear now that's gripped the Gentile nations now. See, now they're scared. They sent this massive army as large as the sand of the seashore, like the sand of the seashore, up against Jerusalem, and they got obliterated, and now they're terrified. And God wants, remember, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Right. Okay, you have to get wisdom and to have God's ways, you first have to have a fear of the Lord. Most people don't have a healthy fear of the Lord like they should. Right. They kind of live their own lives. They aren't really that faithful to the Lord. You need to have a healthy fear of the Lord. And this is what this is doing now, bringing the Gentile nations into a healthy fear of the Lord now, because they are now getting introduced to the Lord's wrath, the Lord's ways. And so this is why, they're scared now. They're terrified. Okay, yes, they need to learn terror of the Lord before they can come and have a relationship with the Lord and understand his love and forgiveness and kindness and all that kind of good stuff. Right.
Okay, let's go and continue on here.
And Judah shall deploy in Jerusalem, and he shall bring together the strength of all the peoples round about, gold and silver and clothes into abundance exceedingly.
Okay, so it looks like Jerusalem, and this is not New Jerusalem, this is Jerusalem over on New Earth now. It was basically became a very, very productive city where they were gaining a lot of material wealth as a result of becoming a huge city on New Earth. Of course, New Jerusalem is only for the resurrected saints, but the ones that were already faithful to the Lord and all that stuff. So no mortals were allowed into that city.
Right.
But in Jerusalem, though, it was the hub for Israel's covenant with God over on New Earth.
Right.
Which is a different covenant than what we're following, our new covenant that we're following here on this earth. They have a different covenant over there. It's called, the Bible calls it the peace covenant.
Right.
And that's the covenant they're following over there. It's a lot like the old covenant, but it does sound like there's some minor differences. If you study Ezekiel a little bit more, you see there's differences between that covenant over there and the old covenant, and it's definitely different than the new covenant that we're following. So they're under a different covenant over there, but as a result, they got very wealthy because the prosperity of the Lord was coming into Jerusalem. And this is probably the reason why Satan was tempting them and deceived them into attacking is, maybe you can get all that wealth that they have hoarded over there in Jerusalem now. If you go attack them, you got 100-1 odds that you'll beat them definitely. And what you'll see is obviously that the numbers didn't matter. They were going to lose one way or another. Okay,
Right.
So let's go and continue on here.
And this will be the downfall of the horses and the mules and the camels and the donkeys, and of all the cattle of the ones being in those camps, according to this downfall.
Okay, and of course now it's explaining how you can see that it's a past event. We don't have, horses, mules, donkeys. We don't use any of those things as beasts of burdens anymore. But in those days, when this all happened over on New Earth, this was common. Here, we live beyond the days of all that stuff, right? So that's why I'm saying all this is past event, but I'm explaining to you what's going on over on New Earth. Now, they're completely different over on New Earth than they are here, okay? Maybe they're still using all that stuff over there. Maybe God has said no to all this modern technology that we have. I wouldn't be opposed to all that. Maybe all this modern technology is horrible for us.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on over there, but obviously we have, because a lot of this, I hate to say it's a lot of this modern technology is fallen angel technology. Honestly, I think that's what a lot of it is. And of course, it gets us all off our spirit. It's designed to get us all off our spiritual guard, obviously. But we got to wield it like a sword and use it for God's glory. But it puts a lot of people into a trap of sin and depravity and addiction. We know that. Okay. So in other words, that's why I'm saying this is past over there when they were using all those kinds of things. That's why people that say this is a future event that's going to happen here. I'm like, no, I don't think it's anything future for us because we're not using horses, donkeys, mules, and all that kind of stuff anymore. That's stuff that we used to use in our past, but we're beyond all that now. Okay, so go and continue, verse 16.
And it will be as many as should be left of all the nations coming against Jerusalem, that they shall ascend by year to do obeisance to the King, to the Lord Almighty, and to solemnize the holiday of the pitching of tents.
Okay, so in other words, now the nations that lost in that war now are going to be introduced to, now we're going to have you guys. Before we just did our own thing. Now we're going to have you guys, if you don't want us to continue to, attack you, and now you have to do what we say now. And part of it is now introducing them to the ways of the Lord.
The covenant.
The God's covenant with mankind. Now it's not just for Israel now and Judah unified. Now the nations now are going to be obligated to come up and obviously bow down to the king, which I assume would be King David. That's kind of what it sounds like. And basically now they're going to have to learn the Lord's ways, and this is God's way of introducing them to learning his ways and his will and his righteousness. See, God wants everyone to learn the righteousness, but he has multi-phased plan in play to learn all that. It's not going to be like in this world, God gives us almost like very little direction. We don't have God sending fire down from heaven, destroying towns like we witness here on New Earth here. What he does here, he kind of gives everybody a choice.
Right.
And he expects us to love the Lord and to do it without being forced to by the threat of death or anything like that.
Right.
But it kind of sounds like it's a little more strict over there on New Earth a little bit. Because now, you already had your opportunity to serve God or not. And the ones who didn't now are going to be under a judgment. And part of this judgment is going to be now, you're going to have to do it our way now. And this is part of the judgment of God, I think.
Right.
So this is kind of what we're reading here. And so that's why they're having to bow down. They're having to do all this stuff. Now, we're going to continue reading on in Zechariah. Go ahead and continue on.
And it will be as many as should not ascend from out of all the tribes of the earth unto Jerusalem to do obeisance to the King, to the Lord Almighty, and these things shall be added to those. There shall not be rain upon them. And if the tribe of Egypt should not ascend, nor come, then upon these will be the downfall, which the Lord struck all the nations, as many as should not ascend to solemnize the holiday of the pitching of tents. This will be the sin of Egypt, and the sin of all the nations, whichever should not ascend to solemnize the holiday of the pitching of tents.
So in other words, they have to, now they're going to be forced to kind of, the other Gentile nations now are going to be kind of forced now to, you got to be serving the Lord now. Because you did this, you challenged us, you fought against us, you lost. The loser now, you guys have to do what we say now. And part of what we're saying to do is you guys got to come year after year to Jerusalem, and you got to start following our ways now, including the feast of the pitching of tents, which is part of what they have to start doing over there. So they have to start following the Lord's ways. Whatever the covenant is over there that God has set up, this is what they're going to have to do. And otherwise, he won't send rain on the people. He's going to use weather modification over there on New Earth, it sounds like, to kind of force the people into understanding the ways of the Lord. And it sounds to me like all the peoples of earth now have to learn all that. This is God's multi-phase plan.
Right.
It's not just, God doesn't work like we think. Oh, he's going to send all the good people to heaven, and then all the wicked people he's going to burn up and destroy in hell. And that's the end, folks. That's not how God works.
It's kind of like this huge rehabilitation program.
It's like a multi-life rehabilitation program.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good description right there. Yeah.
Because he's not going to give up on them. He's going to help them progress however long it takes to get them to where he needs them to be, and where basically everyone is going to be eventually understanding God's ways. There's just no way around it.
If you and I are the righteous here that live our earthly lives here, we die, we get a resurrection over the new earth. This is kind of how it works. We may not be under all these regulations because these are for the mortal, the ones resurrected as mortals.
Right.
When we do God's will here in this world and we are rewarded with eternal life, we may not be required to do all these things because we're going to be like the angels of God in heaven over on New Earth.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what we're going to be overseeing all this stuff, it sounds like, because we're going to be going in and out of the city of New Jerusalem as our home base and learning and teaching the people God's ways. That's, I think, part of what we're going to be doing over there. But, the Bible doesn't clearly say exactly what our mission is going to be over there. But we're going to have jobs to do over there. We're not just going to be sitting around, hanging out, doing nothing all day. God's going to want us to go out there and be like the angels. The angels weren't just sitting around doing nothing.
No, they're servants of the Lord.
The angels, the heavenly hosts, they
Yes.
weren't just sitting around doing nothing all the time. No, they've been busy working with us, helping us out. Now it's our turn. to be like the angels were doing, helping them out.
Right.
This is kind of the way God's planned it all along. And so what did he do? He cast Satan and the angels, kicked them out of heaven, all the evil ones. And now we're replacing them, and we're going to do their job now.
Well, it's because they weren't proven, right? They failed. So now he's going to reward those who've been proven their faithfulness. Kind of why David is the king, because he already proved himself being the king before. I think it's really fascinating that what I see in this, and that's why I call it the rehabilitation plan, but I see that God does not give up. Everyone gets a resurrection. So if you're unrighteous and you get a resurrection, you're going to have a do-over. That's what I looked this up. And it's going to be a restricted one where you're going to have to follow, a set plan and, ordinance, I guess you could say, and you're going to have to prove yourself.
Well, Isaiah 65 and 66 kind of goes a little bit more into what's going on over there on New Earth and explains how, the people there are now, because it's like pre-flood Earth now. That's the Earth that we came from pre-flood. Mm-hmm. And now we're going back to that when we get resurrected. People are going to be living long lifespans, but they're going to be living as mortals, living long lifespans.
Right.
So kind of like the pre-flood world, where they live 900 plus years old. Well, they're going to be doing that again over there, but now they're under judgment for 900 plus years.
It's kind of like, I hate to say it, but it's like they've gone back to school or kind of a prison, so to speak, a real restricted life, and they're having a do-over, but it's kind of like their sentence. And so they're going to have to learn in the second time around to live the life, but it's a, talk about a life sentence, it's an extended, not the 100 years we have here, it's like 900 years, like 1,000 years. So it's really, it's like going back to school if you fail the first time.
Yep, because they didn't learn through living their life here to live a righteous and holy life according to God's ways,
right,
and his will through the Spirit God gave to every single person. Now they're going to have to do a redo.
Yeah.
But now instead of just living, maybe 100 years like we do there, 10 times their lifespan over there. And they're going to have to go through, and that's part of God's judgment against the nations.
Right.
Yeah, God's going to give them long lifespans, but now they're going to be living as mortals again and having to do this big redo. And the covenant over there, it's not as easy. I mean, it's much harder than the covenant. We have a very easy covenant if you have the right kind of spirit and heart. It's a covenant of love and faithfulness and trust of God. And, God will take care of us. Our covenant is very easy. We're not required to do all these types of things they did in the old covenant system.
Right.
But in the covenant over on New Earth, it kind of sounds like they're going back to having to follow a bunch of rules and regulations as a school teacher to teach them the ways of the Lord, so then they could have that easier covenant down the line.
So back when we were students and kids, you went to your grade level, and if you didn't, you needed to slow down or learn it again because you didn't process it right the first time. They held you back. You had to repeat that grade. That's what I see this as. I see this as, okay, you were given a chance on this earth that we're all born into, and you didn't quite learn it correctly, and you didn't pass it, so to speak. So now you're getting a resurrection, but now you're going to have to repeat it. And now it's going to be even a harder lesson to learn or harder restrictions to do it because, not that it was easy the first time around, but because you were stubborn or rebellious or prideful or whatever have you, deceived, whatever, you are going to have to relearn it. And now it's a redo, and it's going to be a tougher process. Because he wants you to be successful. I think that's really the key, right? He wants to give them another chance, and this time there's no error. He wants to make sure they get it. And I think that's a loving God.
Next week, we're going to have a part 2 on this one because we haven't got to Isaiah chapter 66, a final chapter in Isaiah. It describes in detail what's going on over there on New Earth. And it describes the great white throne judgment and judgment day and what happens after judgment day and with all the nations there. And again, more of the purpose behind what's happening over there on New Earth. What you're told about the afterlife in most churches these days is sorely lacking compared to what the Bible actually teaches.
Right.
What I teach here, and I'm not making this stuff up. It's not like I'm just going, I'm going to come up with a new theology and everything. I'm just reading my Bible and going, how does this fit into God's perfect plan? Most churches can't explain it, but the way I'm explaining it now, everything makes sense. God had a judgment day that already happened in our past. After judgment day is God has different judgments on the different peoples, and this is what's going to happen. And that we can go into that next time in Isaiah chapter 66 and talk a little bit more detail. Not only are they going to be following the Feast of Tents, but some other things too. And it goes into that there. Because we know in this world that we live in, it's a very dark, deceptive age. But if we're vigilant, manly, fortified, standing firm in our faith, doing everything out of love, we do this because it's not only biblical,
but because it glorifies God.
Join or contact us at satanslowseason.org. This is a non-copyrighted Living in Satan's Low Season production.